I'm about to make a controversial statement. Necrons are cool. In fact, Necrons are so cool that when I say the words, the Necron books are the best 40k books out there, there's a good shot most of you will either agree with me or at least get where I'm coming from. They're great, especially given they're a race that went through a pretty extensive overhaul from their initial lore. Even massive retcons weren't enough to stop them from being awesome. And yet to me, they somehow also managed to feel underutilized a lot of the time. Not nearly as much as the other races, and I admit that might sound weird to hear. I mean to once again complain about it because I'm a very one-note person. The Necrons get some absolutely banging novels to the point that I'd recommend Infinite and Divine to people who aren't Warhammer fans, and the Ynnari get 2/3 of a trilogy that mollywomps any chance of their lore going anywhere. But there's also some aspects they fall rather short on. Some characters who could certainly be doing a lot more than they actually are, even though everyone can agree they're pretty sick. Trajan's escapades seem to have come to a grinding halt recently, Orican found a way to temporarily become a god, and that hasn't amounted to the grand shift in the Necron world you'd think it would. And of course, there's the topic of today's video, the Silent King. The last and most influential ruler of the Necron tier, the one who damned their souls for all eternity, and he's come back and done a whole lot of not much. But why don't we take a look at him anyways, so you can see what he did before returning to do a whole load of nothing. But hold the phone, folks. The Silent King's a quiet guy, the clue's in the name. But I'm not going to be quiet about WarThunder, the sponsor of today's video. WarThunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game with over 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters, and naval vessels. 2,000 is quite a big number. I mean, I can't even count that high without my fingers, which makes it all the more impressive that each of them is modeled down to individual components. And you can play with that vast arsenal for free on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. And really, is anything better than a free tank? Well, actually, how about a free tank rendered in 4K graphics and with some of the crispest sound design known to man? The atmosphere, the music, things people don't often think about when playing a game, but they all come together with the graphics to make blowing your enemies straight to hell that much better. And since the damage system is modeled down to individual crew and components, you can go into a fight knowing you aren't just winning because your hit point number is bigger than the opponent's. You won because you just turned the enemy tank's gunner into a pulled pork sandwich. And that really gets me going, because seeing a tank take 50 artillery shells in any other game only for it to smoke my front line is, shall we say, a little bit annoying. In order to experience this firsthand, you will download WarThunder using my link in the description and pinned comment. As some extra incentive to ensure you will do this, my link in the description will get new players and those who haven't played in at least 6 months a large bonus pack, including premium vehicles, a premium account, an exclusive 3D decorator for your vehicles, and plenty more. It's available for a limited time, so to reiterate, play WarThunder now. Now then, let's talk about the alien robot who doesn't talk. The Silent King was once a Necron tier known as Zarak, although the title wasn't actually his exclusively. It's a title given to the ruling Necron tier, named as such because he does not speak to his subjects directly, but rather his will is delivered to the two Pharaons below him, who together make up the ruling triarch of the Necron tier. If that sounds like the sort of thing that could lead to all sorts of wonderful corruption, since the Silent King technically isn't giving orders to anyone but two people who could very well have their own motivations to follow, yes. In theory, the position was hereditary. King dies, next of kin takes his place. The slight problem is that Necron tier DNA was complete garbage. Saying they all had cancer is not descriptive enough. They had super cancer. They went even further beyond. They had the Super Saiyan 3 of space cancer. Since it killed them almost at random, it was a complete crapshoot as to whether or not the actual heir would become the next Silent King. So a hereditary dynasty was more of a nice thought to have for the nobles than any actual truth to the matter. King dies, so his heir takes his place, suddenly the heir dies, and now it's a mess until someone who's only nominally related to anyone involved is the new Silent King. This, of course, isn't counting the amount of inter-dynasty fighting that probably killed a good portion of whoever was left to potentially become the Silent King. Necron tier politics were fun. Now, enter the Old Ones. The Old Ones in their ever undefined ways and appearance had by this point become the head honchos of all of reality. Immortality, unrivaled psychic power, they had it all. And the Necron tier, understandably, wanted to get some of that good stuff for themselves. They asked the Old Ones for immortality, which the Old Ones denied. A bit rude, but to be fair, I get not wanting to hand out immortality to any schmuck who just asks for it. The Necron tier also asked them for a cure to their garbage DNA, which they were also denied. That one's a bit more of a dick move. Meanwhile, Zarak was faced with the disunity that plagued the Necron tier almost as badly as the whole space cancer thing. They were spreading out more and more and becoming less and less united, to the point that there was a genuine worry that they were going to wipe themselves out in their civil warring. Like the Cold War, only a galactic-wide empire instead of just one planet getting blown to hell. So Zarak, seeing no other option, made the first of two choices that would lead to the downfall of his people, declaring war on the Old Ones. He decreed that any rebellious Necrontyr would be forgiven if they joined up with him, and the race was somewhat united for the first time in ages to take down the Old Ones. Of course, that's much easier said than done, and despite Necrontyr technology being unmatched, the Old Ones were an entire race of Emperor of Mankind's if he was a fat frog the size of a bus. So they got pretty thoroughly stomped. It was so one-sided that the Necrontyr were all forced onto their homeworld, and what unity they had managed to gain in the war started falling apart. They were bitter at the Old Ones, but most saw the war as unwinnable, so they were willing to settle for peace. They were bitter at Zarek for throwing them into a war they now saw they had no chance of winning. And they were bitter at life in general, both their own and that of other races for not being as miserable as they were. Enter stage left, the C'tan. The C'tan might have been found by the Necrontyr through a number of different ways. Some of the suggested ones are that a probe mistakenly found them on its way to observe a star, or the sheer hatred and bitterness of the Necrontyr radiated out into the universe like a beacon for the C'tan. The ultimate truth of the matter isn't known, which translates as GW hasn't and never will tell us, so I choose to believe that they just appeared one day before the Necrontyr when enough of them shared the thought that things couldn't possibly get any worse. Like when it starts to rain after a character in a cartoon says at least it isn't raining. Or a Bracken when you say the words I think we're gonna make quota this time. The first dealings with the C'tan didn't come from the Silent King, rather it came from the oldest of Necrontyr dynasties still around. Some believe that the C'tan were offsprings of their very own death god, and they saw in the C'tan weapons they could use to overthrow the Old Ones and take vengeance on the galaxy for the crimes they'd committed against the Necrontyr. Of course, those crimes were not giving them the secret of eternal life for free and not having as miserable a life as the Necrontyr did, but that's besides the point. Vengeance is vengeance, it doesn't have to be logical. They constructed living metal bodies for the C'tan in the image of their very own gods, and with their forms now physical rather than weird clouds of gas and magnetic forces the size of a solar system, the C'tan noticed the Deceiver went to the Silent King. The Deceiver made the Silent King the offer that would lead to the second choice of his that would ruin things forever. He told Zarek, "Hey, buddy, those Old Ones sure are dickheads, aren't they?" He told a tale of how they too were wronged by the Old Ones, and if they just worked together with the C'tan, the Necrontyr could have everything they ever wanted. The immortality and freedom for their horde existence they craved would be theirs, as well as revenge against the Old Ones. They would be fully unified, a race truly united as one for the first time. He told Zarek that the Necrons didn't need to give anything in return for these gifts, for they were now the C'tan's valued allies. And really, who keeps track of favors between best friends, am I right? And while his name is the Deceiver, he didn't technically lie about most of what he had said. Of course, one could argue that's the best kind of lie, one that isn't really one at all, but where the truth isn't anything close to what the person being lied to is picturing. Although the no price to be paid part was actually a complete and utter lie, the rest probably technically wasn't. And for all the credit we can give Zarek for doing cool stuff later, in this moment he fell for things hook, line, and sinker. The only person who didn't fall for the Deceiver's BS was Orican, who was completely ignored. Which is a bit goofy because Orican can see into the future, but who would let something as small as that get in the way of listening to the promises of an eldritch, unknowable horror? With everything agreed upon, the C'tan descended upon the Necrontyr and biotransference began. The Necrontyr were now the Necrons, beings of pure living metal that were far stronger than they once were and without the horrible disease that riddled them for life. And it couldn't have come soon enough, because every time I talk about the Necrontyr, I have to consciously keep myself from calling them the Necrons by mistake. Zarek, for his part, was watching everything go down and thinking about how he had just really dropped the ball on this one. When his turn was up, he went through a couple more revelations. He now had complete control over the Necrons, as the command protocols put in place meant he truly had uncontested leadership over every last one of them. So hey, unity's been achieved, hurrah! Unfortunately, he also realized that while he felt better than he had in ages thanks to his new body, he no longer had a soul, and none but his fellow nobles and some of the higher-ranking warriors had anything of a personality left in them. That's incidentally always been pretty interesting to me, that the Necrons seem to still be the same being despite having lost their souls. The way I read it, everything seems to imply that the Necrons aren't just soulless copies of a being that has their personalities and memories. It's the same dude without soul stuff in him. It makes it seem like the soul in Warhammer is as much an organ as it is your damn soul, and apparently a somewhat vestigial one at that. Of course, maybe I'm completely misreading things and they are just that, copies with memories. Who knows? And of course with that, the war in heaven resumes, and you know how that goes. C'tan and Necrons stomp the Old Ones, the Kork and Eldar are created to handle that mess, and the groundwork for everything going as wrong as it does in the future is laid. The Silent King the whole time had been plotting a way to get back at the C'tan, but he knew he had to wait for the right moment. Now boosted with the power of the Necrons' very souls, which for some reason are apparently more nutritious than entire star systems, the C'tan almost certainly would have stomped them into the dirt. And of course the Old Ones weren't gone yet, which means the Necrons would have been alone against them and the warrior races they had created. So he waited until the moment the Old Ones were gone, Kegarat convinced the C'tan to start eating each other, and the remaining ones were so full of themselves after beating the Old Ones they thought they had won everything. That's when Zarek revealed his ultimate weapon, something we know almost nothing about, but whatever it was strong enough to shatter the Catan like glass. Although for once, I don't mind the specific instance of GW not explaining things, because there's actual reasons for why it's unexplained. The Silent King removed the memories of this weapon existing from anyone who saw it, and apparently even without that, the weapons were so destructive that they broke causality and turned the laws of physics into the timid suggestions of physics. Half the people involved probably don't even know what happened to begin with because of that. Now, the Catan have that really lame quality in Warhammer where they're one of the gods that are more villainous than not, which means they arbitrarily can't die because of reasons. Like how people go, the Chaos Gods can't be killed because they embody aspects of the universe and allow it to function, and breeze by the fact that in 40k they didn't exist at one point and the universe was very much fine. But Zarek wasn't done being the cleverest Necron around, and planned for this as well. He knew they had the plot armor to end all plot armors and prepared thousands of Tesseract vaults to catch the Catan shards, imprisoning them for all time. Also, the Flayer Catan got absolutely mulched, completely destroyed, and all that happened was the Necrons sometimes turn into Flayers and go insane. Which sucks for the Necrons, don't get me wrong, but clearly you can kill a Catan and the universe will keep chugging along. With that though, the Silent King knew it was time for the Necrons to leave for a little bit. While the old ones in the Catan were dealt with, the ELDAR were more than happy to keep the war going, and they also couldn't turn around without finding a quirk ready to cave their heads in over and over until death finally stuck. So he gave his final commands to his subjects. 1. He bid all the Necrons to sleep for 60 million years to wait for things to cool off. The galaxy was in a bit of a mess at the time, and it was clear that they weren't taking out the Krork and especially the ELDAR at the heights of their power. His second act was to remove the command protocol so that they were no longer bound solely to him. This would of course make them fall back into infighting eventually, but they were no longer slaves to his will, which was the whole point. And finally, he left the Milky Way galaxy. Just straight up left. He figured he didn't want to see if he could mess things up even worse and went off to either meditate forever or just repent in exile. And so he did. For 60 million years, he floated in the intergalactic void, doing nothing at all. Presumably thinking about what he had done the whole time. It's a good thing that Necrons don't go rampant like Halo AI, because otherwise this dude would have been out of his goddamn mind after a couple of years. All the while, the galaxy moved on. The Eldar dominated the galaxy for millions of years, then fell as they brought about Slaanesh. Mankind spread across the galaxy, with the Imperium eventually arising after the Eldar were gone. The Orcs were also there the whole time, being Orcs. And then he sped back home as fast as he possibly could, because while he was out there, he bumped into the Tyranids. I guess since he's made of living metal, they assumed he wasn't worth the effort to deal with. You won't get a return on the calories you spent in the fight by gnawing on a hunk of iron, after all. He realized that if the Tyranids ate everyone in the galaxy, there'd be no biomass left for the Necrons to transfer their minds into, so he sped home to take control and marshal the Necrons to war once more. He's certainly got some challenges ahead of him, though, arguably even more than Guilliman did when he first reawakened. He didn't expect the sleep to be so rough on the Necrons, what with all the bugs and glitches that plagued the waking ones and the fact that a lot of them just straight up didn't wake up. Without the command protocols in place, he can't automatically assert his will over the Necrons, and those like Imhotep who have quite the prideful streak might not automatically just submit to his rule. And of course, the galaxy is somehow even worse than it was in the aftermath of the War in Heaven. The Eldar and Krork are still around, if diminished from what they once were. Mankind is doing its best to both put out and start fires wherever it goes, and chaos is a galaxy-splitting problem. When he came back, he remade the Triarch with 2 other Necrons whose names I could not care less about and forgotten the time it took me to tab back to the script, so feel free to look them up yourself. Being the king of all Necrons, he had to get himself a cool ride, so he got a moving throne known as the Dais of Dominion. It's got a chained Catan strapped to it, known as the Unchained. Maybe not the most creative of name, but it certainly gets the point across. Now, there's also some lore dickery afoot, because I believe officially the Silent King returned to the galaxy in M41771. But when he met with Dante, he also told the Marine that he had met Sanguinius and seemed to respect him quite a bit, even wearing a mask that was pretty similar to the death mask of Sanguinius. And Sanguinius has been dead for about 10,000 years by M41 year 771, so yeah, have fun figuring that one out. Much like the other 2 members of the current Triarch, I don't care to figure it out because I am lukewarm on the topic of Sanguinius and can't be bothered. And then we get to the awkward part of things where he hasn't done anything at all since coming back, aside from meeting with Dante. No Necron civil war, no grand marshalling against the Tyranids, he's just kinda back chilling out. He really hopes all the meatbags in the galaxy don't just end up feeding the Tyranids more than they hurt them, and that's about it. He may be the ruling Necron, but he's still a Xeno, so don't expect his plotline to go anywhere significant until the 500 Scouring novels will inevitably get before that. Since I'm fresh out of lore though, let's do his tabletop. For lore positives, he is one of like 5 people in the entire damn setting you can play that can be said to be the uncontested leader of their faction in some way. While plenty of Necrons will be happy to punch him in the robotic dick, he's the Silent King. He's the official leader of the Necrons whether or not people want to follow him, and any acts against him are technically treason. Most other leader characters are like ELDAR, where they aren't actually in charge of anything, but everyone listens to them. So if you want your army leader to be the army leader, you want the Silent King. He's also for you if you really want to embrace the Necrons, since he is the Necron character. He's the reason they're Necrons to begin with, so if you're that obsessive over them, you can't do any better. That's not a slight against him, by the way. I obsess over my own factions of choosing. I get it. He's also in the most prestigious of Warhammer character categories. People have had character growth and learned from their mistakes. He's made no moves to reinstate the command protocols he once had. He wants to undo the biotransference he caused, and overall wants to atone for his massive screw-ups in the past. He's a character who dug himself a hole and wanted to climb out, not double down and see if he'll eventually end up on the other side of the planet if he keeps on digging. It's nice stuff to see. The Silent King also apparently can get along with the other races, so hey, that's another major positive. If he was able to think Singonius was pretty cool, he has to think that other races have at least some semblance of worth in the galaxy. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to forcibly vassalize them under the Necrons if he was able to claim the galaxy once again, but that's still better than plenty of 40k characters who see other races and immediately begin shooting. He's also pretty clever in a long-term planning sort of way. Shattering the Catan isn't something that you can do by screaming row, row, fight the Powa and then punching them in the face. 40k'd be a lot cooler if that was the case, but it isn't unfortunately. The Silent King had to make sure everything was right, taking a massive gamble that paid off spectacularly. He knows what to do and when to do it, and that while overwhelming violence is great, overwhelming violence at the right place and time is even better. And last lore positive, he is one of the people in the setting who acknowledges that there are other threats than chaos out there. And if you, like me, wish people would understand that the unending horde of bug monsters with teeth the size of a pickup truck are a bigger threat than the demons you can fight by praying them away, you want the Silent King in your army more than perhaps any other named character. As for tabletop pros, the Silent King is one hell of a unit, so let's just start off with the weapons he brings to the table. For range damage, the Silent King himself has the Scepter of Eternal Glory and the Staff of Stars. Aside from being names that even Cetra would admit are pretty cool, they hit pretty hard. The Scepter of Eternal Glory has 2 attacks that hit its Strength 10, AP -3, and cause 3 damage a pop. The Staff of Stars has 12 attacks at Strength 6, AP -1, and cause 1 damage each. The Scepter can do a solid job at taking out larger threats, and the Staff can ensure any chaff your opponent tries to drown you in have a very bad day. Both of them hit on a 2+, so they'll be fairly reliable too. But hang on, because we aren't done yet. Do you see those 2 floating whatever the hell's next to them? Those are Triarchal Menhirs. He gets 2 of them when you take them, and they each have this lovely thing called an Annihilator Beam. It's only 1 attack each, but hits its Strength 14, AP -4, and causes 6 damage. Goodbye, Dreadnoughts. Have fun in hell. It also hits on 2+ as well, and combined with the Scepter of Stars, the Silent King's range game can take out quite a few of the melee monsters in the game before they can reach them. Only a 24-inch range, which is by no means horrible, but not quite what I would consider proper artillery range. Still, very good stuff. His melee game isn't anything to scoff at either. His Scythe of Dust throws out 12 attacks that hit on 2-ups at Strength 8 and AP -3 for 2 damage a pop. Between the volume of attacks and the not inconsiderable power behind him, he can actually put down quite a few characters in the game with a single turn, or take out a horde of weaker mobs that try to jump him. There's also the 2 melee attacks the Triarchal Menhirs have, which are most definitely things that can be used in the tabletop game. They're just floating obelisks, so I get they aren't exactly getting ready to throw down the gauntlet and kick some ass, but I almost wish they didn't give him a melee attack at all. Like, if the Silent King doesn't take out a threat in melee, is the damage 1 Strength 4 attack really gonna manage it? The mental image of them bashing on top of someone like a Thwomp is pretty funny though, I'll give him that. He's also hard to kill on top of it all. His base stats are already solid. 16 wounds with a 2-up save and 4-up invuln save is nothing to scoff at. But those Triarchal Menhirs have 5 wounds each, their own 2-up save, and I'm almost positive they share the Silent King's invuln save as well since they're a part of his unit. So functionally, he has 26 wounds. Sure, you do lose the Menhir's Annihilator Beam if they die, but that's a lot of bullets you gotta throw at them if you want them dead. And even if I'm wrong about sharing the invuln save, you still get 10 extra wounds. He can also explode when he dies for up to 9 damage, which is nice. Never anything huge when that's a feature on a model, but it's always welcome. To top it off, his buffs. He's the king of the Necrons after all, he'd better provide his army with some buffs. At the start of each battle round, he picks one of 3 buffs for his troops. He can let units within 6 inches of him reroll hit and wound rolls of 1, he can let units within 6 inches of him reroll all charge rolls, or he can allow units within 6 inches of him to ignore modifiers to all rolls they make except for saving throws. He can also select a unit within 12 inches of him that's suffering from battle shock and remove the battle shock. Just gone. It was there one moment, now it's not. And last but most certainly not least, his model. Good sweet lord is model. This thing is beautiful. He's beautiful. The Menhirs are beautiful. The other two Triarchs I don't care about are beautiful. The Dais of Dominion is beautiful. The Catan Shard whose skin he turned into his cloak is beautiful. This model is fantastic. The only possible flaw I can think of is that maybe it's a bit hard to fully paint him, but he's a Necron, remember? In terms of color, all you need are green, bluish green, and metal. There you go. But he's still got cons. If you would like to find a single person to blame for everything wrong in 40k, he's probably the best pick. He started the war in heaven, and him accepting the Deceiver's deal to turn the Necron tier into Necrons caused it to reignite, which set the stage for quite literally everything that would come to follow in the setting. This man broke Warhammer 40k, and that's quite the baggage to be carting around a character. For such a prominent figure, though, he's pretty underwhelming in what he's up to. The leader of the Necrons who single-handedly turned the setting into what it is, and he's been doing jack shit since he got back. Thank you for coming back to the Milky Way to tell everyone the Tyranids are a problem. Truly a never-before-considered insight. Please tell me if I'm missing something major, because I want him to do more stuff, but all I can really think of him getting up to was him talking to Dante and apparently Sanguinius. Awesome. More Space Marine stuff. Fantastic. That's what I want to hear in my lore about a legendary Xeno character from 60 million years ago returning. And you know what? That's it for the lore cons, but I can't emphasize that last one enough. He's barely done anything since he came back. It is aggravating as hell to know that the leader of the Necrons has returned, and he's done basically nothing. Have fun with that in your army. A near-mythical figure of legend who returned, found a fancy chair, and did nothing else. For tabletop cons, it's also going to be pretty quick, because the downsides are pretty simple. I think the buffs he provides to other Necrons are pretty underwhelming. By no means bad, but they could be better. Like rerolling charge rolls to Necrons nearby is good, but at the same time, because it's within 6 inches of him, it means he's practically got to be on the front line himself. A rather risky way of using your leader character. The ignoring modifiers ability at self-ignoring saving throws is pretty unfortunate, and while letting troops reroll 1s to hit and to wound is pretty nice, I don't think I'm crazy in saying he should be able to let them reroll all to hit and wound rolls that are failed. He's the silent king of the Necrons. Let him be busted. Part of his arsenal being reliant on something that can be destroyed is also pretty disappointing. Now, losing those absolutely stellar melee attacks that Triarchal Menhirs have isn't going to haunt you to your dying breath, but losing out on that Annihilator beam just might. It is admittedly a small thing to be upset at, but still worth noting. The technical 26 wounds is great, but what's not great is getting ready to finish off your enemy general, or an elite unit like a knight, only to realize you don't actually have all the attacks on your datasheet anymore. He's also slow, but he's a Necron character, so that's not shocking news to anyone. He can fly, which is nice, but at 7 inches of movement, he's still moving at the pace you'd expect a 60-million-year-old man to travel at. And the worst of all is his point cost. 470 points last I checked. That is hefty. There are many other things you could be taking instead of him for that cost, like Catan or other leader characters. Did you know the Void Dragon is only 270 points? And he's deadly as hell. Really, I'd say this is the crux of any problems he might have. He's good all around, even if I think there's some areas he could be better in. But with 470 points as a price tag, there are plenty of troops, elites, or generals you could get instead. You can't bring him in smaller games, and as you can probably guess, losing him in larger games can destroy your entire game plan. He does everything well, but I'm an Eldar main. I'd rather do one thing superbly. Also, good lord, Kane is a god, and even he's not that expensive. Oh, he also has to be your warlord, but if you couldn't figure that one out, I don't know what to tell you. He's the Silent King, not the Silent Seneschal. And that's the Silent King. I wish his tabletop section wasn't as long as his lore section. He's a cool dude. Wish we had a lot more of him. And thank you again to WarThunder for sponsoring this video. If you want to win the most thrilling of vehicle battles through precise marksmanship using 100 years of military history worth of hardware, you can do no better than this game right here. Download WarThunder today using my link in the description and pinned comment to get all sorts of goodies, and start blasting everyone you see straight to hell today. And of course, thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You were the biotransference to my Silent King, giving me untold powers at untold costs. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Just to rub it in before we end, notice how his lore states that he went to bed because he knew the Necrons were no match for the Eldar. Oh, you thought I was just gonna breeze past that one, did ya? Yeah, that's right. Eat my entire ass, Necron fans. Eldar sweep. They got nerfed from the best faction in 10th to the best faction in 10th. Eldar sweep.